Center for Citizenship presents International Conflict, Video 3, Military Action, the Gulf Wars. One of the ways the United States has dealt with international conflict across the world is through military action. This is different from declaring war, because military action in this case means that the United States sent military troops without actually declaring war on a country. As you might have learned in other videos in this module, there have been a few times the U.S. has taken military action without actually declaring war. For example, Korea, Vietnam, and the Bay of Pigs. In this video, we're going to learn about two more times, Gulf War I and Gulf War II. After watching this video, you'll be able to understand one method used by the United States to deal with international conflicts, identify specific examples of international conflicts in which the United States has been involved, and explain why the United States became involved in each conflict and how that conflict was resolved. Remember, it's pretty important for you to take a look at the other videos in this section to make sure you really do understand how the United States has approached international conflicts and how it's resolved them. But in this video, we're just going to take a look at the Gulf Wars. In the other video in this module about taking military action without declaring war, we learned about Korea, Vietnam, and the Bay of Pigs, and that the United States took military action there to fight communism. While Gulf War I and Gulf War II were a little different, and then we took military action without declaring war to fight supporters of terrorism. Gulf War I, also known as the Persian Gulf War, happened in 1990 and 1991 in the Middle East. This occurred after the country of Iraq invaded Kuwait, one of its neighbors. Iraq and Kuwait often had conflict over their shared border and oil, and Iraq invaded Kuwait and took over the country. The United Nations strongly criticized the invasion and gave Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, a timeline to remove their troops from Kuwait. If Iraq did not follow the timeline, the United Nations gave its member nations permissions to use force to remove Iraq. In other words, they had permission to use military action. The United States led a group of 34 nations and used military action against Iraq to remove them from Kuwait. It's important to note that the U.S.'s military actions were done as part of the United Nations, and Congress did not declare war against Iraq, so this was not a declared war according to the Constitution. Once Kuwait was free, the United Nations, led by the United States, imposed economic penalties on Iraq. It also required them to submit to regular inspections for weapons of mass destruction, which would include chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Let's check in. Try to answer each of the following questions in your own words. Why did the United States become involved in Gulf War I, also known as the Persian Gulf War? Iraq invaded Kuwait, so the United States worked with the United Nations to force Iraq to leave. What methods did the United States use to deal with Gulf War I, the Persian Gulf War? The United States took military action as part of a group of countries under the United Nations. Remember, though, that this was not a declared war according to the Constitution. What was the outcome of Gulf War I, the Persian Gulf War? At the end of the conflict, the United Nations and the United States imposed economic penalties on Iraq, and Iraq had to allow inspections for weapons of mass destruction. A little more than 10 years after the end of Gulf War I, the United States was back in Iraq. Gulf War II began in 2003 and continues through today. This international conflict is often referred to as Operation Iraqi Freedom, or the Iraq War. It would eventually lead to the overthrow of Iraq's president, Saddam Hussein. So what led us to Iraq a second time? Well, let's get a little bit of background. On September 11, 2001, members of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda flew planes into the World Trade Center in New York City, the Pentagon in Virginia near Washington, D.C., and a field in Pennsylvania. Over 3,000 Americans lost their lives as a result of this attack. This was a horrible terrorist attack. Terrorism is the use of extreme fear or violence to achieve a goal, such as changing government or policy. And after the attack, Americans wanted to fight back against terrorism. We asked the Afghan government, which allowed members of Al-Qaeda terrorist group to live in Afghanistan and train for the terrorist attack, to give up the leaders of Al-Qaeda. When that failed, U.S. troops were sent to Afghanistan to remove the government that provided support to Al-Qaeda. The U.S. president then declared a war on terror, and said the United States could invade any country where terrorism was supported. Remember, though, that Congress can only declare war on a country, so the phrase war on terror is not actually a constitutional declared war. The United States then focused back on Iraq. Although Iraq was not involved in the September 11th attacks, Iraq had a history of using chemical weapons, and so the U.S. government felt justified to invade Iraq. the U.S. Congress authorized the president to use military action in Iraq, but did not declare war. Now remember that, even though the president can definitely send troops overseas as commander-in-chief, he's pretty limited in what he can and can't do with them, because of course Congress has to pay for it. The authorization to use military force against Iraq meant that Congress was willing to pay for it without necessarily declaring war. Eventually, Hussein was defeated and captured, but this international conflict continues, as the United States and other nations fight terror groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places around the world. Let's check in. We've certainly learned a lot. Try to answer each of the following questions in your own words. Why did the United States become involved in Gulf War II, the Iraq War? After the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, the U.S. wanted to fight back against terrorism, and Iraq was accused of having chemical weapons. What methods did the United States use to deal with this bigger conflict, Gulf War II or the Iraq War? The U.S. took military action without declaring war, invading Afghanistan and Iraq. What was the outcome of Gulf War II, the Iraq War? Saddam Hussein was captured, but the United States continues to fight the war on terror in Afghanistan, Iraq, and around the world. So taking military action without declaring war is an important tool the United States uses to address some international conflicts. In this video, we learned about Gulf War I and Gulf War II, two international conflicts in which we use military action without declaring war to fight a battle in the Middle East against terrorism. Be sure to check out the other videos in this module to really get a sense of how the United States has approached other international conflicts in the past. Video 1, Declaring War, World War I and World War II. Video 2, Military Action Against Communism, Korean War, Vietnam War, and Bay of Pigs. And Video 4, Diplomacy, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Iran Hostage Crisis. This video is created by the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship. Thanks for watching.